The Victorian period, which lasted from 1837 to 1901, was marked by strong social rules and stringent morals that dominated many aspects of life, particularly romance and marriage. Men and women followed a strict procedure in which any physical contact, however harmless, was highly prohibited. Courtship was a ballet of controlled glances and gestures, and even the slightest misstep may result in social rejection. Despite the appearance of virtue, many women experienced worry and perplexity on their wedding night. A lack of sexual education and interpersonal information left brides exposed to unpleasant experiences. The story of Effie Gray, whose marriage to John Ruskin was annulled owing to an inability to consummate it, exemplifies the harsh realities of ignorance, social expectations of purity, and the suppression of any sexual urge or need. Transformed marriage into an institution fraught with emotional and physical suffering for many women. What was marriage really like during the Victorian era? Marriage was much more than an act of love in the social and economic context of the 19th century, particularly between 1837 and 1900. Marriage was seen as a fundamental transaction, a deal that not only defined the personal destiny of the individuals involved but also impacted family structures. Far from being a simply romantic act, married life was infused with a pragmatic logic that emphasized economic well-being, social security, and family preservation over emotional concerns in a culture with stringent social standards. Courtship became a formal, deliberate procedure. The debut season for young women, which took place primarily in London, served as a social showcase in which women were introduced to potential husbands at events such as high society balls and dinners. Mothers and matchmakers played important roles in seeking advantageous marriages, both economically and socially, and relationships were formed. Not only on mutual attraction but also on the strategic alliances forged between families. Victorian marriage was a legal act as detailed as any commercial transaction, and women's diaries, which were often meticulously negotiated, were seen as an essential component of the union, representing tangible capital. A deciding element that can ensure a family's stability or, conversely, jeopardize a woman's chances. A woman's financial well-being was determined not just by her personality or capacity to elicit affection, but also by her inheritances and assets. A succession of books and social guidelines regulating the norms of courting and married life further promoted the pragmatic approach to marriage. Mrs. Beeton's books, such as the Book of Household Management, provided detailed instructions on how to behave in social interactions, how to evaluate a prospective husband, and how to navigate the complexities of married life. These texts, which were extremely popular at the time, helped shape women's behavior by guiding them not only in household details but also in meeting the strict social and economic standards imposed by Victorian society. Victorian chaperones, protectors of couples from being intimate. During the Victorian England, morality and reputation ruled everything. The chaperone was critical in enforcing conformity with stringent social rules to safeguarding women from scandals. This inconspicuous but important individual supervised social contacts and ensured that young ladies did not go beyond society's expectations. The chaperone not only accompanied young women to social events such as balls and outings, but also served as a shield against any inappropriate behavior in a society where women's public behavior was constantly scrutinized. Any misstep could cost them their reputation as debutantes. The presence of a chaperone was essential for navigating this world of strict conventions. The chaperone image evolved in response to the Victorian concern with purity and decorum. Whether they were family members, married friends, or male relatives, these social guardians made certain that women followed the standards of conduct placed on them. This practice was also reflected in the era's literature, such as the works of Jane Austen and Edith Wharton, where chaperones served as moral moderators. This role of vigilance not only protected women but also maintained social order in a society where reputation was essential for acceptance. The chaperone ensured that women's behavior remained within established boundaries. Without their presence, scandal was imminent, albeit by the late 19th century, the chaperone's position had lost importance. During its heyday, it was an essential component of social interactions. Chaperones were more than mere observers, they acted as guardians of public morality, ensuring that the social rules of the time were respected and that women behaved according to the strict expectations of their era. Courtship evolved into a choreography of exquisite movements and gestures filled with significance in a culture steeped in utmost refinement. The Victorians used fans, flowers, and dances as a language to show the deepest feelings. Victorians lived in a society of rules that were strange. One of the most symbolic components of Victorian romance was the fan, which was significantly more than just an accessory. A fan in a lady's hand might express a variety of sentiments in terms of warmth. A closed fan held before the eyes expressed regret or repentance. An open and swinging fan may imply desire, while a fast peek through the fan could indicate disinterest or scorn. Precise language necessitated a thorough awareness of unwritten standards, and individuals who failed to adhere to these conventions risked damaging their reputation or being misinterpreted. Similarly, gentlemen practiced their own set of gestures and rituals. The bow, for example, was more than just a nod of the head, it was a symbol of respect or, in certain situations, desire. Even the depth of the bow may change its meaning. A small bow was a display of civility, but a deeper inclination may indicate stronger love desire. These gestures were so institutionalized that rules on proper gentlemanly behavior were compiled in various manuals such as Cecil Hartley's dating etiquette norms that had to be perfectly followed to avoid social scandals. While these codes may appear rigid and even artificial, they actually formed the basis of a complex and sophisticated form of communication. Even the deepest feelings, those deemed inappropriate for open expression by society, were channeled through this elaborate language of gestures. The most genuine emotions were masked by the surface of these rituals, maintaining composure and decorum while delivering a clear message to those who could read between the lines. Flowers, known as floriography, were another fascinating method of clandestine expression in Victorian courtship. While the red rose was a universal symbol of love, other flowers conveyed much more nuanced and complex messages, for instance, a bouquet. Ivy, a sign of constancy, and rosemary, which represents recall, were utilized to convey lyrical meanings without the need of words. In a society where social rules severely limited freedom of speech, the flowery language gave a safe haven for people who wanted to express themselves without regard for decorum. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, for example, exchanged Tussie and Muse's small bouquet of flowers as part of their courtship, reflecting the widespread use of flowers as a secret language among lovers. The art of Victorian courtship through letters and dances. It was in letters and afternoon teas that the most complex love stories were woven, with the rules of etiquette and personal desire intertwined in a precise social choreography. In the Victorian era, the letter was more than just a method of communication, it was a vehicle through which sentiments of love, longing, and sorrow could be communicated without jeopardizing the sender's reputation. Epistolary communication developed as a result of the advent of the penny post in 1840, which allowed letters to be mailed for only a penny, and young loves discovered a method to court without public exposure through the pen. There was a lot of advice on how to write love letters back then. Lady Elizabeth Scott's The Polite Letter Writer, 10850, manual taught young ladies the value of combining emotional openness with care, ensuring that no expressed emotions would lead to controversy. Love letters maintained a fairly precise pattern, beginning with polite pleasantries like "My beloved Miss" or "Honourable Sir," and progressing to lengthy words that, although not overly blatant, gently indicated the sender's passion. Phrases like "Your absence casts a shadow over my days," or "I find myself irresistibly drawn to your company" allowed feelings to be understood without breaching rigid social norms. Some famous romances, such as that of poets Elizabeth Barrett and Robert Browning, exemplified the power of letters to nurture deep and confidential love. In fact, Browning's letters are considered one of the most notable examples of Victorian courtship, a testament to how written words could forge a relationship amidst social restrictions. The act of letter-locking, folding letters intricately to create their own envelope, was another popular technique of the time. This elaborate method not only protected the letters from being opened without permission but also reflected the importance of privacy in an environment where personal secrets could easily be exposed. The Victorian ballroom was the primary stage where social rules and desires met at these events. The dance card played a crucial role. It was not merely a list of potential dance partners but a map of social courtship, a tool that dictated the interactions and romantic possibilities of the evening. Each name inscribed on a dance card was an opportunity for young women under the watchful eyes of their families and society's scrutiny to choose with whom to share those moments of public interaction. Victorian dances were deeply structured events, and the dance card was the key to their choreography. This small card, pencils in hand, allowed young women to assign dances with gentlemen based on social importance or status, or in some cases, personal desire. Being included on a lady's dance card was an honor, a step closer to potentially consolidating a relationship or even, in certain cases, the acceptance of a marriage proposal. The dance, with its various steps such as the waltz, which was far more intimate than a quadrille, served as a metaphor for the complex social games dictating romantic opportunities. The importance of the ritual was such that even Queen Victoria, before ascending the throne, participated in this social game with her cousin Prince Albert at a ball in 1839. It is said that the young prince carefully observed Victoria's dance card, noting with whom she danced and how the evening unfolded. Thus, the ball was not merely an opportunity for entertainment but an act of social strategy in addition to dances. And letters and afternoon tea became another key setting in the ritual of Victorian courtship, inspired by Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, who introduced this tradition in the 1830s. The tea ceremony transformed into an intimate space where personal relationships could be cultivated in a tranquil environment less public than the ballroom. Here young gentlemen could finally approach ladies under the pretext of sharing a cup of tea and engage in deeper conversations. Etiquette for behavior at these gatherings had strict and detailed manuals, like the Book of Household Management by Isabella B. Tunn. Precise instructions on the protocol to follow, from proper attire to the order of serving tea. Every aspect of the meeting had to be in place for men. Afternoon tea was an opportunity to demonstrate their courting skills. Without the physical constraints of dance but equally loaded with symbolism, visits or calls were another fundamental social ritual for couples advancing in their relationship. These visits often took place at specific times of the day according to the norms of proper conduct, and men had to present their calling card, a small piece of paper with their name, as a sign of respect and consideration. During these visits, the couple could enjoy some time alone away from the hustle and bustle of balls and larger social gatherings. However, as with letters and dances, visits were subject to the strict social norms regulating behavior and commitment to the alchemy of Victorian engagements. Love dowries and diamond engagements during the Victorian era was not merely an act of love, it was an intricate social and financial contract connecting destinies, families, and reputations in a world where the rules of courtship were dictated by strict codes of conduct. The act of becoming engaged was a complex phenomenon that intertwined the deepest emotions with the demands of social standing. This process of transformation, where love crystallized into gold and prestige, formed the cornerstone of the Victorian institution of marriage in the social fabric of the era. The dowry was not simply a gift from the bride's family to the groom but an essential component of the marital exchange in Victorian England. The dowry was regarded as a chest of material assets, often including land properties and an annual income, making it a fundamental economic consider that this practice had evolved over centuries, and by the 19th century, the families of engaged women were exceedingly meticulous in negotiating the terms surrounding the prenuptial Contracts that detailed the conditions of the dow and financial agreements were meticulously crafted to ensure that marriage was both a personal union and an economic transaction. The diary of Samuel Pepys, the 17th century, already highlighted the importance of dowries as a decisive factor in a woman's desirability for marriage. However, it was during the Victorian era that this element gained even greater complexity, not only representing the bride's fortune but also signifying the financial stability and social status of both families involved. Beyond properties and material wealth, parental consent, especially in the case of women from high society, was a crucial part of the arrangement. The pressure for parental approval of the engagement and often the marriage itself reflected how love was intrinsically tied to social expectations. Marriage did not merely unite two individuals but also joined two families, with the dowry serving as the tangible manifestation of that connection. The engagement of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1839 marked a significant milestone in the history of courtship and royal marriage. Victoria, who held a position of power as the monarch, defied the conventions of the time by proposing marriage herself instead of following the traditions of grand balls or public events. The proposal was private, conducted in the quiet of Windsor Castle, making it even more meaningful. This act not only altered the dynamics of royal courtship but also broke the tradition that the man must take the initiative in such moments. Although private, the engagement quickly gained public visibility when newspapers like The Times announced the royal union, solidifying the new relationship and elevating the couple to an even higher social level. Thus, engagement was not only the beginning of a personal union but also a public declaration of status and power and the validation of both parties' positions in society. The engagement ring is one of the most recognizable symbols of marital promise, but its history in the Victorian context is marked by symbolism and significant changes in the jewelry industry. While diamonds are now considered the standard for engagement rings, this was not always the case. In the Victorian era, when Prince Albert proposed to Queen Victoria, he gifted her a ring shaped like a snake, a figure that symbolized eternity. Choice was significant as the snake ring represented enduring union, reflecting not only the depth of their commitment but also a broader vision of love beyond mere luxury. It was in the late 19th century, with the discovery of diamond mines in South Africa, that the diamonds became firmly associated with the idea of eternal love. In this context, jewelry companies led by brands such as De Beers began promoting marketing campaigns linking diamonds with matrimonial engagements. This marketing effort, combined with the increased availability of diamonds, cemented the diamond as the undisputed symbol of eternal love, overshadowing even the more symbolic choices like the snake. Once the terms of the engagement were agreed upon, the event itself was conducted with a formality that underscored its social significance. Engagement ceremonies, although often small family gatherings or intimate luncheons, could also be occasions where symbolic gifts of great sentimental value were exchanged. These might include family heirlooms, prayer books, or lockets containing portraits. Such objects not only sealed the engagement but also acquired deep meaning, uniting the families through a tangible legacy of shared promises. Engagement announcements in newspapers such as the Morning Post and the Times played a crucial role in making the couple visible to society. These public notices served as official declarations of the union, elevating the couple's social standing and solidifying their place within the intricate web of Victorian social expectations, silence, love, and the romantic labyrinth of Victorian desires and morality. Victorian love was presented as a carefully choreographed dance where passion had to be constrained beneath a veil of strict social and moral norms. Romantic relationships, although intensely emotional, were limited by a complex set of unspoken rules that governed every gesture, word, and glance. Courtship was not just a form of attraction but a minefield where the slightest misstep could trigger scandals that tarnish the reputations of those involved, especially women in this context. Love was not merely an emotional bond but a playing field where social codes, morality, and reputation intertwined, forming a labyrinth in which human desires were constantly suppressed and redirected. The literature of the era mirrored these tensions. Writers like Jane Austen offered a portrayal of love that, while idealized, was not devoid of conflict in her novels. Courtship unfolded within the boundaries of social expectations, yet always hinted at the internal struggle of characters navigating between their desires and the external demands of society. In Austen's stories of characters who challenged norms, such as Mr. Darcy or Elizabeth Bennet, they were not only romantic figures but also symbols of human resilience against the rigid structures of their environment. Conversely, the Brontë sisters presented a much darker and more passionate version of love. The relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine in Wuthering Heights stood as the antithesis of Austen's idealization here. Love was not merely an attraction but an obsession that transcended social norms and often destroyed them. The love between Brontë protagonists became a destructive force, one that defied moral and social conventions, revealing the dangers of unrestrained desire. This narrative stood in stark contrast to the gentleness of romantic comedies, opening the door to exploring more intense and inherently perilous passions. The contrast between Austen's perspectives and those of the Brontës reflected the tensions of an era in which, while love was an ideal, it did not always fit within established molds. While Victorian romances often celebrated virtue, duty, and restraint, they were also expressions of desire that escaped the boundaries of morality. George Eliot's novels, such as Middlemarch, soberly and realistically depicted how marriage, ostensibly the culmination of romantic love, often ended up stifling not only individuality but also an institution that could crush the hopes and dreams of those caught in their own decisions at the same time. The phenomenon of serialized novels captured the public's attention, creating collective anticipation over the fates of characters. Works like Charles Dickens's Great Expectations, published in installments, became a form of mass romanticism. Readers speculated over Pip's fate and his relationship with Estella, building an emotional connection that transcended the pages. These stories, though fictional, provided an avenue for escape and reflection on the dilemmas of unrequited love, attainable passion, and the limitations of human relationships outside the literary sphere. The language of desire in everyday life was also shaped by the need for subterfuge in Victorian society. Love was communicated indirectly and symbolically, the use of flowers, the language of the fan, and even the placement of a glove on the hand became codes for expressing feelings that could not be spoken aloud. The simple act of exchanging glances or touching hands could carry profound meanings, emphasizing the fragility of romantic relationships in an environment of constant social scrutiny. Beneath this surface of control and moderation, however, emerged realms of love that defied norms. Writers and artists such as Oscar Wilde and the Pre-Raphaelites began to explore the shadows of love, pushing emotions to their extremes. Wilde's works not only criticized the social restrictions of his time but also addressed themes of homosexual desire, which were profoundly subversive in his era, with his sharp wit and wild symbol of the fight for emotional and sexual freedom challenging the rigid moral norms of Victorian society in intellectual and bohemian circles of the time. Love began to take freer, more experimental forms in the Molly houses. Clandestine spaces where homosexual men gathered offered a setting for exploring dimensions of love that not only challenged the morality of the era but also gave visibility to a segment of society forced to remain hidden. In these underground environments, love was an act of resistance, a direct challenge to the heteronormativity that dominated Victorian culture. This hidden and often repressed love was also reflected in the lives of figures such as Catherine Dickens, whose public separation from Charles Dickens in 1858 was a scandal that shattered the facade of the stable family life so highly valued by society. Events like these revealed the reality behind the polished image of domestic life, demonstrating that love did not always align with social expectations and that human passions and desires could not always be contained by Victorian moral norms. Between shadow and passion. The Wedding Night and the Silent Secrets of Victorian Sexuality. The Victorian era, the concepts of sex and the wedding night were profoundly shaped by strict social norms and rigid moral expectations governing daily life. While Victorian society was renowned for its devotion to virtue and morality, sexuality was far from straightforward. It was shrouded in a dense veil of repression, taboos, and often ignorance. Intimate acts within marriage, particularly on the wedding night, were marked by the expectation that the woman should be pure and, in many cases, a kind of sexual tabula rasa. The prevailing notion was that women were to be ignorant or innocent of carnal pleasures, and intimacy within marriage was often seen as a duty, rather than a source of pleasure, especially for women. The Victorian wedding night was an event laden with symbolism and expectation, but also considerable anxiety and mystery. In many cases, it was not a moment of unrestrained passion but rather a ritualized formality in which the newlyweds engaged in an act that was rarely discussed openly. The general expectation was that the bride, who was usually a virgin at the time of marriage, would surrender her honor to her husband. In this context, intimate intercourse was viewed not only as the consummation of marriage but also as an act of ownership. The husband claimed his wife, and penetration were often perceived as a physical transaction in which the woman's virginity was conquered despite moral expectations. Victorian marriages were often tinged with anxiety, discomfort, and ignorance. Women were socially conditioned to repress their desires and view intimacy as a means of procreation rather than pleasure. Female pleasure was regarded with suspicion and, in many cases, entirely disregarded. The idea that a woman could enjoy intimate activity was considered inappropriate and even immoral. Victorian medicine, heavily influenced by religious morality, not only suppressed women's intimate desire but also pathologized it as female hysteria. Was openly discussed as a condition thought to afflict women who exhibited excessive intimate desire or passion. To treat this supposed disorder, some physicians recommended pelvic massage or manual stimulation, a practice that could be seen as a primitive form of medical masturbation carried out by doctors in their offices. Meanwhile, men, though equally bound by societal expectations, had greater freedom to express their desire and fulfill the sexual roles. Men were generally expected to initiate intimate activity and were often encouraged to seek pleasure in the marital relationship. However, this did not exempt them from social taboos, as they too were pressured to conform to Victorian ideals of respectability and self-control. Intimate acts within marriage were also strictly regulated by law, which prohibited adultery and, in some cases, even intercourse outside of marriage. Victorian morality enforced strict anti-sodomy laws with severe penalties for those who violated established sexual norms, particularly regarding homosexual relationships or intimacy practices deemed non-reproductive sexuality, which were closely tied to reproduction, and women were primarily seen as reproducers responsible for bringing children into the world, while men enjoyed greater freedom to explore their sexuality within legal boundaries in addition to social morality. Sexual censorship extended to literature and media. Books and literary works that addressed themes of sexuality or extramarital relationships were often censored, and discussions of intimacy in Victorian society were extremely limited. Thus, intimacy existed primarily in the private sphere, surrounded by profound silence or moral rhetoric that framed it as dirty, dangerous, or, at the very least, something to be kept strictly within private bounds. Men were also influenced by norms that deprived them of the freedom to explore their desires openly. In the Victorian era, a rigid masculinity was often promoted, emphasizing total self-control and emotional detachment. The idea that men should be strong and restrained often led to frustration in their intimate relationships, particularly if their wives failed to meet expectations of desire or sexual responsiveness. Frustration sometimes found an outlet in prostitutes or clandestine brothels, where upper-class men often sought to satisfy their desires covertly as societal conventions limited their freedom within marriage. The repression of sexuality was a hallmark of Victorian society, but it was not absolute. While men could seek satisfaction through prostitution or extramarital relationships, women were trapped in a double standard. They were expected to be pure and, at best, silent about sex. However, not all was repression. In less normative circles or marginalized sectors of society, sexual desires are found liberation from moral oppression. Bohemian circles of art and literature, though marginal, served as outlets for those who could not conform to Victorian expectations, finding insensibility or what society deemed perverse. A way to express what was hidden, the wedding night in the Victorian context was not merely a social formality but a battleground where public expectations, religious beliefs, anatomy, and sexual ignorance clashed. Despite repression and control, there were both public and private avenues for escape that offered glimpses of transgression against the strict sexual norms of the era. Repression did not eliminate intimate desires. It merely drove them into the shadows, where they wove themselves in silence, waiting to be discovered.